All right, what's going on, everyone? So in today's video, I'm going to be going over why my students get results. I'm going to be pulling back the curtain on everything that I do. I'm going to show you guys my process and also my methodology for working with students and getting them really good results. I think at the end of the day that, if you're a coach, you need to have a repeatable process you can take kids through. That doesn't mean to say that everything is exactly the same for every player. I want to be clear, I customize what I do for every single student. But you want to have a framework that you're working through. If you don't have that, it's going to be really, really difficult in order to be successful. So I want to actually go ahead and share this with you guys. So when I kind of look at my method, it starts with the first thing of input. And we need to have some inputs here. We're doing some stuff, right? If we go out there on the golf course and we want to practice something, we're putting in an input. If we go and say, I'm going to play more golf because I want to get better, we have an input there. I suppose I should actually, looking back on this, I should have started with, hey, we have got a goal, right? If we don't have that intent, then none of this stuff makes any sense. But assuming we've already got that basic here, we've got a goal. If you're following my stuff, you might want to play Division I golf. You might have a junior golfer who wants to play Division I golf. It's kind of a good start. Well, we have to do stuff to get that result. And that's all that input really is. And I like to have it simplified in this way because then we can sort of add on and be like, well, what do these things mean? But if we don't have this starting framework, it's really hard to understand what we're actually doing here. Now, next thing is we have an output, right? We do some stuff and then some stuff happens. Right? There's no better way to really articulate that. You did a practice and then you got a particular result in a tournament or on the golf course, right? This is really the way to think about that. And you can be as micro about this stuff, which is I did a drill today and performed at this level, or you can be as meta as you want, which might be a process or a system of things as an input, or a process or a system of things as an output. For example, an output could be a better ranking, but a ranking is going to be a collection of different things, right? It's going to have your scoring average. It's going to have your golf courses that you played, the number of tournaments that you played. You're going to change as a player if you play more tournaments, right? So that's going to change as far as inputs go. Playing more tournaments might be an input, right? But we still kind of stay with these fundamental things. We can't distill out what our inputs and what our outputs are. It's going to be really difficult to progress. And to be fair, most coaches, they do this, but they don't do it in a macro sense. So what do I mean by that? Most coaches will look at your golf swing and they'll say, hey, I don't like this particular ball flight. Ball flight would be an example of an output, right? And so I'm going to change the way that your swing is moving in order to change that ball flight. So I'm going to change it is going to be an input. I'm going to do something differently. I'm going to have you do this drill. I'm going to have this obstacle there that you have to miss. One of those things, right? That's the way that a coach is going to look at that. The trouble is there's so much that goes into scoring and playing golf at a high level that isn't really addressed within your golf swing. So you can stripe it all day on the driving range, but you could still go out and shoot 85. And I'm sure that a lot of you have actually had that experience where you're a junior golfer, they're hitting it really well, their coach is happy with it, they go to the golf course, they play in a tournament, they shoot 82, 83. They don't understand what happened. And the reality is there's a lot of stuff that goes into golf that isn't just, hitting a golf ball on the driving range off a flat lie. And it's not just, hey, sometimes you're on the golf course and you have different lies. It's stuff as detailed as what's the yardage? What's the correct yardage to be playing? How much variance can I have in my ball flight? Did I adjust for the wind correctly? It was off the side instead of in my face. Those are all things that we need to be able to get really good at. And they just don't happen from that one lesson. So it's not necessarily that a coach is doing a bad job. Certainly there are coaches that, could be better coaches. But a lot of time they just don't have enough scope. And so in my process, especially working with junior golfers who want to play college golf, I'm not just going to say, hey, you need to change your golf swing. It's yeah, maybe. But that's probably not even the biggest thing. There's a bunch of other stuff that goes into this as well. But once we've got our output, I'm just going to say for the sake of this, input, pretty basic. Output, might be score, something like that. We need to have analysis. We need to look at what happened, right? That's fundamental to this. If you guys have any background in science, this is a scientific method. That's very, very straightforward. We need to analyze. We need to look at what happened. And then we make a hypothesis. We say, all right, based on what happened, I think it's because of this. And I'm going to do this thing in order to create a different output, right? So I'm going to have a hypothesis. I'm going to have a different input. And I'm going to have a different output. It's really that simple, but this is the core of what I do. Now, input could be, in most cases, practice plan, right? How are we going to practice, right? What are the drills we're going to do? How long are we going to practice? All those different things are different, inputs But as a big, kind of high level, you could call that the practice plan. Output might be scoring average, right? So I've got my practice plan, and I've got my scoring average. Another way you could look at it as be rankings, perhaps, depending on the level of player that you're at. Then we have stat review, right? I'm a big advocate of having all of my students track their stats so that I can actually see what's going on. And I'll show you guys that here in just a second. But we need to be able to actually look at it and be like, all right, scoring average is cool, but what are the other variables in here? What's going on really? And then why? Let me move my head here. No, that's not right. Boom. Practice adjustment, right? So we've analyzed what's going on. We said, okay, cool. What are we going to do differently in our inputs to create a different output or a better output, right? That's the process. That's as simple as I can get this, right? Now, I'll save this one for a little bit later. But to be clear, just so you guys don't get too far on this hook here, there are ways that I actually make this a little bit easier for myself. I want to go back and show you something else first. So when I'm working with students, I track all of their scores. And so one of the things you'll see right here across the board here is we see scoring differential at the start. We see scoring differential currently or today or whenever I've decided to measure this, the improvement in an absolute metric, the monthly improvement. So I track how many months we've actually been able to evaluate this. So I can say, all right, this is how much we're improving per month. And then I annualize that. So how's the annual improvement here? Now, based on these numbers, I'm able to say, okay, here's what the mean is. If you just take all these numbers and divide by the number of numbers, right? Or I can take the median, right? I can say, all right, overall, what's kind of the most common? What's the middle, right? And then another one that I like to have just to kind of measure myself as a coach to make sure my stuff is getting better is what are my trailing 5 students? One of my most recent 5 students. What are they? At least that I have numbers on, and I'll get to these NAs here in a second. Most recent students, the trailing median is almost 5 shots per year. So normally I say the average improvement I work with, or average student I work with, improves by 3.15 shots per year. To be fair, that was in the past. It was maybe a month ago. It's gotten better since then. And there's also the mean, right? So mean average, almost 5 shots, and trailing median, which is tends to be a little bit more conservative, is right around 4. And so if I'm looking at this as a coach, I can say, I feel good about myself as a coach that my students are moving in a positive direction because I can point to data that proves that. Now over here, you guys will see NA, right? NA is what I do for students who do not have a scoring differential. They don't have a junior golf scoreboard ranking, and that's fine. I track them in a different place. But for the sake of this, when I'm saying, I'm saying to you guys, or the public in general, here's what to expect. I always like to go for what I feel like is the most conservative approach, right? Which is, where are they ranked on junior golf scoreboard? So I'll give you an example. One of my students, Severin here, just so you guys can see my actual process in this. Boom, he's got a scoring differential of negative 1.49. And you can see right here, boom, negative 1.49. We started working together in August where he was negative 0.41. So he has improved by a total of about a shot. And he's on pace to improve by 6 shots. Now, that's probably going to change over time. That's going to become a little bit different. But again, this is just about average here. I'm not looking at any one of these players and saying, oh, well, I'm going to take the best one who's improved by the most and say, oh, well, you're going to get that result. It's not necessarily true. But we want to look at the average, so that's what I do with my students here. Now, like I said, for the students that I don't have in junior golf scoreboard, I can always look at my circle. So I have, as a dashboard for all my students, I can actually look at where they're at and how they're playing. All right, so I'll show you another example with another one of the students. So Harris here, I'm able to see every single round he plays, and I'm able to see how he performs in those rounds. So I can actually make a decision about okay, cool, what are we supposed to do with this? So if I were to go back here to our handy dandy process, I can understand, I have the actual number. And I can look at it and say, okay, cool, what are we going to do as an adjustment, right? Because I can actually look at these data points and make a decision based on that, right? So then I can say, what do we do about that? Actually, the secondary point of this analysis, if you've never been to my channel before, you won't know that I have this page. I like to pull out specific data that gives me a prediction. This is a formula here on what we're going to shoot on average. And then if I can play around with these variables, I can actually see, like if I change one of these right here, you're going to see it change the improvement number. So I'm able to strategically say, okay, cool, this is the thing that's going to improve you the most. So let's focus there, right? Again, so this is kind of part of the analysis part of this process. And then if we go on here, we can actually say, okay, here's what we want to do different. Here are the adjustments. Here's the practice that we want to do. Are we executing on that? That's the difference here in that practice adjustment, right? So hopefully this makes sense to everyone. It's a relatively simple process, but it's very, very effective. But one of the things that I want to kind of draw your attention to, and I'll kind of transition into kind of how I cheat this a little bit for myself. One of the things you'll see here is the average monthly improvement. In a lot of cases, it's like a quarter of a shot. That's kind of normal. And when we kind of consider that, one of the things that's going to set successful players apart from unsuccessful ones is the speed that they judge the results coming in, and how they choose to do that. Because if you have a player who's judging themselves off the month to month up and down, that's going to be very difficult to be successful. I have never seen a good player who judges themselves off the month to month performance. They're looking at their game as a whole. And that's how I encourage my students to look at their game. When I look at their numbers, I'm looking at 10 rounds as kind of a minimum. I'll look at 5 rounds when we're getting started, but once we're there, I'm looking at 10 rounds as a minimum. 10 rounds for most players takes somewhere between 2 and 3 months to be able to actually look at that. So that's a whole quarter. And even in that case, given these numbers, we're not even necessarily improved by an entire shot, right? But the successful players are able to see the long game. Successful families are able to see the long game, and they're willing to commit to that long game. So a lot of coaches, they approach things and they say, and I promise this will transition into my next piece here. A lot of coaches, they have players come to them, and they have to make that player better in an hour or an hour and a half, and make that family feel good, or they don't work together, or they don't continue to work together. And so most coaches are highly incentivized to do whatever that player wants, right? And as you get higher level of coaches, what you'll find, because they have so much demand, is they're much more firm about, hey, here's what you need to do, take it or leave it. This is my process, take it or leave it. That's how they approach things, because they don't need the money. They'd rather work with high quality students, and they're not really there to put up with that BS. They're not here to have the parents say, hey, well, I really know what's going on. It's this, 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 and this, and I just wish you could tell my kid that. That's not how it works. Odds are you don't know how this process goes, unless you've already played Division I golf, or if you're a professional golfer or something like that, then sure, you have some input there. But for the most part, most parents are in that position. And if you find yourself in a spot where you're telling the coach, like, hey, I think it's actually this thing, and then the coach just runs with that, they're just taking your money. That they're saying, hey, I've got to make the most out of this. I've got an obnoxious parent. I'm going to appease them. But that's not someone you should necessarily, at that point, you've lost the thread. You're just paying them to hang out pretty much. And I say this, I coach coaches. I work with coaches and help them and listen to the problems they're having, help them puzzle through those things, with my golf mentor. And so this thing I see on a regular basis, and it's so important and crucial for you guys to understand, is elite players don't do that. Elite players commit to long periods of time, and they do what they're asked to do. It's very, very simple. But the best experience with the coach is, as a coach, you tell them to do something, they do it. They say, hey, here's how the process is going to work. They're like, all right, cool, makes sense. They do it. They do not do the kind of I'm not sure. Players who are not sure are not successful. They struggle, they drag out things, it's painful. But players who commit are very, very successful. So transitioning back into how I cheat to get my players better results. First one is PreSelection. So I just kind of went over that whole spiel to you guys. about how players who are more successful tend to commit, right? That's just one of those characteristics that I find causes players to be successful. And so I can actually see if I've been working with a family or if I'm talking to a family, because I do pre-screenings before I take on a client. And if they're kind of like giving me hints where they're just like not really sure, they give me the try it out vibes, they just want to see how it goes. That's just an immediate red flag. And I've been doing this long enough that I know what that family ends up being like, and the type of results that they can expect. And to be clear, it's not nearly as good as the families who are just like, yep, this makes sense. So I'll give you one example that I do with every family. I do not work with families for less than 12 months. And so when I'm working with them, I make that clear up front that it's like, hey, it's this investment. It's a substantial amount. It's more than most families are used to paying for golf instruction. That said, it's somewhat of a litmus test here, because every student I work with, every one of them says, okay, cool. Yeah, that this makes sense. We're going to do it. We're going to commit. You understand there's a financial commitment to this. Let's do it. Then there's the other families. They'll try to like get around that, try and find a way that they can try it out for 1 to 6 months. And in my experience, universally, the families that commit to that do exponentially better than the ones who try to tiptoe around and try and try it out. That's just how it goes. And you guys have probably experienced this. I have a resource below this video. It's a PDF, right? It maps out what your junior golfer needs to do to play Division I golf. Now, if you go in there, you click the link, you opt in, you give me your name and email, or name, email, phone number. The probability that you read that PDF is much lower than if you paid me for the PDF. It's just how human brains work. The more we're invested into something, the more seriously we take it, right? If you're somebody who downloads PDFs, I'm sure you might get a lot of PDFs, and you probably have read maybe 10% of them, right? And that's not me critiquing you. That's just reality. I do it too. But again, if you pay for something, you pay attention to it, right? The more you pay to it, the more you pay attention, right? So if I want to get students the best results possible, right, I could really slim down the number of students that I work with and charge an astronomical amount, much more than I charge right now. But I don't, because I also have, I have a reality of, I want you to be able to go to tournaments. I want you to be able to invest in the other things that you need to do as well in order to be successful, right? So it's what's that balance there. But the point is that commitment weeds a lot of families out. A lot of families are not willing to make an annual commitment. They want to try something out for months, even though we're in a situation where it doesn't even make sense to say, oh, let's do it month to month. You guys have already seen that you're only improving by maybe a quarter of a shot, which is a dumb amount of time or amount of improvement to really make a decision on how you feel about something. But it's also, we're talking about something that's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. A year is the short commitment. We're not ready to do that. We're just not ready to do it. We're not going to be successful, and that's completely fine. And that's a big part of what I try and do with your families. That's probably what I try and do with these videos, is to help you guys understand, like, here's what it actually takes. And yeah, there's a reason that more kids are going to get into Harvard than are going to play Division I golf. It's harder to get into Harvard to play Division I golf. There's a reason for that, and I want to pre-screen to make sure that you're that type of person, you're the type of family that can actually do that. And that's just for my own enjoyment. So the other one that I'm looking at is, do we have a high probability of success? I'm not going to take on a student who has, can't hit it anywhere, no time, bad scores, bad grades, weird attitude, weird relationship with the family, wants to haggle on how everything is getting done. It's not a good time. Versus if I can look at a player and say, okay, cool. So we're here right now. We're shooting these scores. You're going to improve on average by this much. You guys just see maybe it's probably better than that, because I'm going to try to get better as a coach. But if we just take this like conservative scenario, do we have a high probability of reaching our goal? If yes, great. We've got a good vibe going on. I talk to all my families again before I start working with them, so I can actually look out and be like, okay, are these people weird? Do I have a high probability of getting them a good result? Are they going to be good people to work with? That's one of those things that I'm evaluating on there. And so once I understand that, then I can say, okay, cool, let's take next steps. Now, just to kind of go over for you guys, just so you can understand, if you have these goals, you got to understand a big part of this is not just me being smart and telling you guys the right things to do. It's you guys and your junior golfer being the type of person or type of family that is actually going to be successful. And so these are the traits that I really recommend you guys try and have. 10 to 16 years old is when I typically start working with students. There's some edge cases where you could be 17 if you're a junior. And I'll share a story with one of the students that I work with who's in that specific situation. But what this all just kind of symbolizes is like earlier is better. Start early. Successful families start early and they're ready to pull the trigger on uncertain things, because if you have an 11-year-old, yeah, they could do other stuff. Absolutely. But by the time they get to the point where they're just not doing anything else, they're probably a lot shorter on time, right? So people end up being successful. They're much more comfortable with risks. They're much more comfortable with calculated risks, right? So when they say, hey, we're doing a bunch of different stuff, but this is important, this is a priority. Okay, yeah, I know stuff could happen in the future. You get hit by a bus, you become paralyzed, whatever. But we need to do this now rather than later, because they understand the basics of investing, right? You invest a little right now and you get it over a long period of time versus the flip side of that. So that's the first thing. You want to be in that age range. Earlier than that's great. There's just not much stuff you can do. It's more about just helping your child enjoy the game. Very humble. This one's huge. This one's like very, very striking. The best junior golfers I've worked with are the most humble. Like they approach things, they're like, I don't know anything. Help me understand, tell me what I need to do. And then they just do it. They study, they want to learn. They're not know-it-alls. They're very, very just open to learning. They're very, they can be intense as far as like wanting to know more stuff. But for the most part, they're just a joy to work with. So, if you're looking at how do I become more successful, higher probability of helping my child, or if you're a junior golfer watching this, how do I have a higher probability of being successful? Just be very humble. You probably don't know that much about how this process works, and that's okay. That's why we're watching a video like this. But that's just, I can't stress this enough. Like there's levels to this stuff, and I'm a pretty good golfer. I'm somewhere in kind of a zero-ish handicap right now, then as low as a +3 competitively. But there's like +6s, +7s, +10s. Like there's levels to this stuff. There's scenarios where I might be able to talk through something, but someone who's like maybe a +10, like a John Rahm or someone like that, or Rory McIlroy, Scotty Scheffler, they're gonna have details to this stuff that's just beyond, right? And so if you're watching this, you might have a scoring average of, if you're pretty good, maybe 75, 74, 72. Just know that there's levels. There's a lot of people out there who know additional stuff, and the people who are most successful tend to be the ones who are always thirsty to learn that stuff rather than assert how much they know. Hopefully that makes sense, everyone. Prioritize golf. This is another one. It should be relatively simple, but if you're trying to do 6 different things, you're trying to do and pursue all of those at an extremely high level, the probability that you do that is low. It's just kind of how it goes. Like, yeah, there's some anomalies where people like have 2 sports they end up going to college for. Like I was a basketball kid, so like Nate Robinson, I think, played like football and basketball at the University of Washington. But for the most part, most people aren't like that. And so you just want to be able to prioritize things. I don't care if you do like multiple sports, like that's fine. Like that's completely normal. But if you're looking at it and saying, hey, I want to do 6 different things, and how do I squeeze golf in there? It's probably not going to be a successful thing, at least succeeding at a high level. And again, this is how I cheat this, right? It's going to be easier for me to get students recruited because I can pre-screen this. I can say, okay, cool. We're all in on this. It's not just kind of like another thing that we do. Willing to do what it takes. This is just kind of an addition on that. It's just there are some families that just want it on their terms, right? Like that's how that goes. It's just everything needs to be on their terms. So like, AJGA throws tournaments at the wrong times. And it's like, realistically, if you want to do this stuff, like you're going to have to make sacrifices. You're going to have to do what it takes. And if you don't, that's fine, but everyone else will. So everyone else is going to be successful anyway. And so that's just something to keep in mind here. You got to be willing to do what it takes to succeed at a high level. And I think the last one here that I've got is they're willing to make that commitment. And again, this is like the biggest screening thing that I like put on my students is like, you're making this annual commitment. You're making this annual investment here. And we're not breaking this up. We're not, sure that there's, payment plans, stuff like that, for somebody who's like willing to make the commitment, but they just can't make the finances work. That's one thing. But it's that annual commitment that's so valuable that really separates the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. If you're evaluating something on a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter basis, on something that takes years, probably not going to be as successful as someone who's just like, nope, the boats are burned. I have to make this work. Those players tend to be much more successful. and they're a lot easier to work with, and so on and so forth. So I hope that this was very helpful for you guys in just kind of understanding the traits. And I want to tell you a couple stories, a couple different angles of different players I've worked with over the past couple of years that have been recruited. So Eli is the first one. Eli was the one that I gave the example of. That's an older kid. We started working together either when he was 16 or 17. I can't quite remember because he was older. He's going into his junior year, right? So that was an example of a player who was actually, kind of late on this. The difference here, though, was he had a scoring average about 75, right? So he's still a pretty solid player. He had a ranking and everything. I think his scoring differential when we started working together was about 3. So let me just see here. Yeah, I'm pulling up that tracking program I showed you guys. So yeah, his scoring average or his scoring differential was 3, right? And so when we looked at it, we're like, okay, cool. We need to sharpen up the tournament selection here. We need to sharpen up the scores a little bit, because typically if I see Division I want it to be somewhere in the 72 to 74 range. 75 is a little bit outside of that. Another thing, we're looking at the golf course and they're just kind of short. So it's like, all right, cool. We need to play better tournaments. So we go from playing 6,000 yard tournaments to like 7,000 yard tournaments, because he wasn't distance challenged, stuff like that. He just didn't know. And then we started getting cleaner about 3-putting, hitting greens, and just kind of like making smart decisions around the golf course, kind of understanding our averages. And then he ended up being very, very successful. After about a year of working together, improved by 3.5, 4 shots, which again is kind of normal-ish. And that's what gave me the confidence initially to work with him. It was just like, well, we don't have to improve by that much. And we're going to have a high probability of playing Division I golf. And so that's what ended up happening for him. He ended up getting a scholarship to go to William & Mary, had a couple other offers. But it's a relatively simple process if we have kind of all these other characteristics line up. He's just a great kid to work with. Did a really great job. Anything I asked him to do, he just do it instantly. No questions, no problems. His family was awesome to work with. And so like Eli is a fantastic model for anyone who's like later to the game, kind of looking at this, like, what do we need to do? Like that's the way to be. The other side of this coin would be Matt Hull. So I want to be transparent with all these kids. I'm not the only person that they've ever worked with. It's not like I got them out of into the game and so on and so forth. They came to me because they wanted to get better at their practice. They wanted to be more data driven in their decisions. They wanted someone seeing kind of like that 30,000 foot view of where they need to go, which tournaments they need to play, and all that stuff. They kind of had an idea of that rather than just saying like, hey, I'm going to go fix your swing. So Matt, I worked with another guy, TD Luton, who's the assistant coach at Duke for 4.5 years. Really good friends with him. And then my golf mentor, a guy named Jeff Smith, who teaches on the PGA Tour. But with Matt specifically, golf swing is excellent, right? He started working on the game, I think he was like 12. So again, earlier, right? But for him, he played all the time, right? He was just very consistent about that. Practice at a very high level. And for him, it was a lot of just kind of getting in the right events, kind of like knowing where to prioritize his time, and allowed kind of enough time to go by. Just made sure we were keeping track of his numbers so we didn't become like golf swing crazy, because sometimes that can happen with really elite players. They see something, they know what to optimize for, and they just optimize on that. A big part of that is getting you to optimize for the right stuff. And so that's one of the things that I helped him with. And like I said, specifically like playing in the right events, so that when he shoots the good scores, which will inevitably happen because of averages, that he's playing in the right stuff when he does it. So he ended up getting AJGA exempt, and ended up having a lot of different offers, but ended up settling with UCLA, which is obviously an incredible program. So a couple different angles on kind of how this process typically goes from different students and different angles. But I hope this video is more importantly helped you understand what it actually takes to be successful, and how it's not just like knowledge. It's not just having the right coach. It's a disposition, right? It's saying, okay, cool. Like, it's being willing to make commitments on things that are uncertain and being able to go all in on those things. I think that's kind of the biggest separator there is people who are able to succeed at a high level, especially in golf, are able to deal with a high degree of uncertainty and still like execute. So I think that's the thing that I want to leave you guys with. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Hopefully you learned something here. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Come out with videos like this every single week. If you enjoyed this specific video, please leave a like. And if you want to learn more about junior golf and how to kind of navigate that process if you're a junior golfer. Maybe you're just getting into this. There's a link below this video to my PDF that I mentioned. You can go ahead and download that. That'll just kind of get you started and kind of like show you what you need to do, just kind of big picture, and go from there. So hopefully this video was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.